Hi, I'm Kimberly Rivers with the Ojai Valley News, and thank you so much to Andy Gilman, who is a candidate for Ojai Mayor. And we're doing these candidate interviews here at the Ojai Valley Museum. Thank you so much to the museum for letting us be here in the library, which is open to the public. Anyone can come and look at the fabulous archives that the library has. I want our listeners to know that in the questions, when I mention something that Andy has referred to, that's referring to last week's OVN campaign coverage article where the candidates responded in writing to the same slate of questions. And so today's questions have not been provided to the candidates in advance. So Andy, if something's unclear, just, ask me to clarify the question and we're gonna dive right in.
Super.
So when asked what was working in Ojai, you said that Ojai's on the verge of positive change. Mm-hmm. And you said, in talking about that, creating and implementing a reasonable plan for short and long-term thriving. So where do you see that creating and implementing taking shape?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I had the answer to your question I had thought about several times. It has to do with meetings at nonprofits that I'm attending or that was on the boards of or whatever. And I hear the way they're describing the synergy that could be happening among the nonprofits. And I'll give you a really clear example. Through the Green Coalition as a lead partner, thinking of 8 or 9 environmental nonprofits drafting a general sort of climate policy to offer to the city to say, here's a lens you can look at with all your projects. That to me is very exciting to think, oh, all of Ojai's nonprofits there in that way. Or to think of Help of Ojai working more directly with the city to have contracted line item services as part of the city services. That's part of it in the nonprofit realm. Even the Land Conservancy delving into, this is outside of the city, but the water adjudication to say, we have these riparian rights there along the land, and even my nonprofit working with some of the events that we have coming up with safety and fire and things like that. I'm seeing a lot of interest in collaborating, and I think that they see some interesting hope possibly with a new council first, and then even with a new OUSD board that I'm very excited about that board and what they're interested in. So an opportunity for a lot of fresh start is what I'm seeing.
Okay. And you kind of mentioned some key parts of that plan. Mm-hmm. I was going to ask about that. And so I guess in that, if you were elected, mm-hmm. what's something in that idea that you would jump into right away that you would be most excited to work on?
Yeah, well, I made a video about one, which is the Ojai Cultural Contribution. So it's an idea I've had for a couple years now, and it's taking 1/15 of the TOT. So of that 15%, taking one of those, and which is about $433,000, and dedicating that to what used to be called the community grants in the city, where the nonprofits would apply. What I'd be interested in that is on the city's website, you'd say, here's the whole timeline, here's what we're looking for, here's what you need to do to meet the criteria. You have to be obviously 501c3, your reporting has to be correct, in good standing with the state, etc. But if it could be attached to some kind of needs assessment that several of us in the nonprofit world are thinking about offering to the community, just to understand what are the housing needs here. I mean, because we all kind of anecdotally talk about it, but to have numbers would be really great. Yeah. So some kind of needs assessment, and then put it out for this kind of almost a request to receive proposals now from the nonprofits. So that's the first thing I'd like to do, is quadruple the amount of money that's available to the nonprofits right away. And as you know, we're in a very interesting moment in time where we have this surplus of money. I'd like to put it to that use. And in fact, the council meeting tonight, I will speak on this very point, to say, let's attach the values that we express as a community to providers who this is their expert area, right? So the city's not going to get into the business of rent assistance. Let's let Help of Ojai do that, right? But let's help them do that because it benefits us all, as a case in point. So the first thing I like to do on that front would be one. I think the second thing is having people like, or organizations like the Green Coalition or like the Fire Safe Council become active partners in the city. So they're part of collaborating with us around, as I was saying, a lens for climate action on projects. In the Fire Safe Council, it would be maybe the collaborating agency with all the other fire agencies, that when we do our disaster training and those kinds of things, that not only are they in the room, but they're helping to guide the strategy. You know, that's what I like to see there, is more active partnerships like that, which I think we've had them in the past. I'd like to rebuild some of those that seem to have collapsed of late.
And like formalize that collaboration in some way.
Yes, and formalize. So again, that's on the council tonight too, and that is the wildfire protection plan that's being proposed. That's not, and never was meant to be, the whole plan. That's really the start of the conversation, to say the resiliency centers that are being proposed, like at Summit or the Honor Farm. There's other great ideas too, like speaking with John McNeil, the former chief. Soul Park was thought of as a plan, as a location, you know, so could we revive all of those plans that have been shelved for a while, to say, how can we weather the next Thomas fire really well? How can we learn from that? But anyway, having those people in the room as regular collaborators, I think would be a great start.
Okay, great. And then kind of on the other side of that question, when asked what's not working in Ojai, your list included that two things that I wanted to talk about, that the economy is over-reliant on tourism, and that low and middle income families are being priced out.
So you picked the two hard ones.
Yep.
Great.
And so with the economy being over-reliant on tourism, maybe, you know, from your perspective, why is that a problem? And maybe dive into that problem a little bit.
Yeah, sure, you bet. Well, there's two things why it's a problem. The first is that when something happens like a Thomas fire or a COVID, as we saw, or even just the inn doing a reconstruction, we see, you know, as the budget has it right now, the TOT is $6 million this year. That's 40% of our revenue.
And really quickly, for folks who might not know the TOT acronym, it's
transient occupancy tax
that we get, the city gets from hotels.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and that's not even counting any of the property tax, or I'm sorry, sales tax that we would be getting from tourists being here, and that's easier to identify than it might seem. In any case, when something happens like a COVID or a Thomas fire, we take that very serious hit, right? So in that sense, we're vulnerable in ways that none of us would like to be on tourism and what would happen in our economy. And that's why we have the reserve that we, you know, many councils ago, they had the vision and the wisdom to say, we want to have a healthy reserve, even healthier than, or larger than many cities do have. Secondly, though, is this, they're both related subjects, actually. It's that in the job market, when we look at all of that data and see that the growth in employment has happened primarily in that service area, right, in the tourist area. And we see that those people are not paid as well or well enough to live here, to buy a home here, or to afford the rents here. So that's why you see something on the order of 2,300 people driving in every day for work and 2,100 driving out every day for work, as we've seen in the census data. So there's people driving in every day to work at jobs, to get paid, you know, in the service industry and out, but who can't live here or maybe choose not to. And then secondly, the higher paying jobs not being here. So where I used to work, which, you know, at BST Bryant Circle for 18 years, we had 60 people there just working on our computers primarily, and then we had about 50 people remotely that would come in regularly. And we rented houses for them to stay in, but then we had too many people, so they stayed at the hotels. And I would like, it seems to me, some low-hanging fruit would be to work with something like the Economic Development Collaborative of Ventura County, who I know, and I'd like to ask them to advise us seriously about what do they think the best strategy for Ojai would be. Is it a staff position? Is it a commission, a council, whatever, but that we actively attract a business or two that we would like to be here. Now, I know individual council people have done that on their own. I know individual efforts, but to have another lynda.com or ITI here that could be employing people like that, I would love it if we could just get even 50 more people that are commuting out to stay at an employer like that. And then again, we build our economy in such a way that we have a little bit more resiliency in the face of difficulties that will certainly come again. So that's my interest in diversifying the economy in general. But there's another thing too, which is if OUSD does well and, you know, grows further, and they have their affordable housing project that they're in the very early stages of, that could change that dynamic too. So those are more people living here that work here. But then if the school enrollment grows, that, you know, if there are some more families here that kids go there and we have the jobs for them to do it, I would just like to solve that other problem, which is that we have a median age that's gone up 10 years in the last 2 censuses, and we have an OUSD that is 50% of what it was in 2000. I'm saying things that all your viewers probably know. Those are 2 trends that I think about every single day, that I feel like these kinds of efforts will work on. Now, these are longer efforts. So when I talk about things like council procedures, even the Ojai cultural contribution, those are much faster. Those could all happen in that first year, and the council procedures could happen much earlier than that. But these things, they're going to be slow to launch. It's going to take a while. As we know, affordable housing projects take forever to actually get built, even after approved. And so it would just be initiating those things probably in that first year.
Yeah. And so then the other item was low and middle income families being priced out. And so, you know, going forward, how can Ojai work on that?
So this is, I think, what has happened, as we all know, from the state leaning on municipalities like Ojai that have said no for so long, not just this council. They lean towards developers, and so we have 3 projects really right now. You could say there's Cabrillo Vista that has been approved, but probably 3 years out, you know, that is they're raising their money. And then we have the Becker group of projects in various stages, and then the Habitat for Humanity. So it is true, let's prudently watch those develop and see how does that change the dynamic of our town. But what I'd like to do is, and this is what I've said several times, is instead of being forced by developer-led opportunities, I would actually like to initiate some. And again, those are going to be slow in coming, but it would be possibly setting up a housing trust or something like that to then work with somebody. And I keep saying Mark Whitman because I love his design, but Mark Whitman designs it, you know, it becomes part of an Ojai aesthetic in a location that we choose. It could be a housing trust land or city land or something, that's all to be decided. But something that I would, again, lean into what I would call very low income housing. So even our median income, I think, is 123 for the county. That, and then the low income would be up to 30% of 123. That's still a lot for people, for many people to afford. So something even better than that, if possible, I'd like to work on. And again, this is where I when I think of the surplus or what we could do that could attract some county, state, or even federal money through, let's say, HUD or something, to say, what can we do to help these families? It's all research phase right now, really. It's looking at opportunities and locations and looking at the projects that we have that already are in development. But again, the scale is so small in a way in our town that we're not talking about that many projects or that much of a change to make a big difference, I think, in a few of these things. So again, I'm not saying 1,000 more OUSD students. I would like to see that tick up in the dozens, and I'd see that as an indicator for change. And I think it's already beginning, so I think that's really good. They're already reporting some really healthy differences. So that's where I feel there is we would be initiating some projects. And I did mention specifically, now I know this is a HUD project, but another Whispering Oaks seems so clearly needed. And that, you know, that's a project that would absolutely require some outside Ojai financial help to make it happen, because their rent is 30% of whatever their income is. But if you look at the county site there, basically their waiting list is so long that before they went to the lottery system, it was a 5-year waiting list. And what I had heard from the encampment was there were 3 people there that could qualify for a Whispering Oaks if there were room. So, I mean, right away. So that would be a project that I would like to initiate the research on, again, right away. As I would almost do that at the first council meeting, is say, what can we initiate to at least start the research on an expansion of Whispering Oaks or some other Whispering Oaks. So just our older citizens are not being cared for properly, it seems to me.
And, I mean, I think in the context of that, there's been conversation around the county's role in the Valleywide issue, right? Because Ojai is so small. Do you kind of see that as an issue? How would you kind of, and what would be the mayor's role in that?
Yeah, no, well, you're asking a lot. In one case, actually somebody wrote into the paper too, and I've heard this in many places, but the county does have projects for the unhoused, but also affordable housing, and actually looking at what the city of Ventura has done in their area. I'm not saying I want to be Ventura, I don't, but you see there's many housing projects going on there. It seems to me what the mayor can do is build relationships that I'm not sure are there right now. And so what I mean is to know our supervisor really well, or to know our assembly person, and be working with them in some form of collaboration. I look at Mesa as a great example of a nonprofit that did it really well. And this is 3 years in the making to get to this point, with generous beginnings there, but being able to work with SOAR, with Matt Levere, with Steve Bennett, and so on, that it seems to me with the right project, working the right way, with the right relationships, you could build a Mesa. I'd love to be able to build things like that. And maybe it's not in the city, but maybe it's part of an Ojai County collaboration. So, and again, coming to some of the talks here at the museum, there's a lot of agricultural people who, longtime Ojai people who their expression is, SOAR is sort of a blunt instrument, for example, right? Not to do away with it in any way, but just to say, can we see, is it meeting its intentions? And just looking at it one more time, that's all I would really be looking at for all of these ordinances or initiatives of any kind, is have they met the vision, and just to want to ask that again and see, does something need to change? And if so, to prudently, work on it. But yeah.
Okay. Shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah.
So when asked about the current mayor's recent term, you said Ojai needs a political reset. So what do you think that looks like? And this is kind of two parts. So what do you think that, or what do you mean by political reset? And then if you were to be elected in the role of mayor, how would you gauge whether a decision or council action was successful? How do you define success?
Okay. The second part will have a couple of pieces, but on the first part, I remember going to a debate, probably you guys did it or somebody did it, maybe 3 or 4 cycles ago, and there might have been 3 seats available, and here's who was running, and they all seemed like they were sort of friendly with each other, even though they had differing opinions about what to do. But it had a completely different feel than the last couple of elections, meaning they all respected each other well enough to be on a stage together talking. And the last cycle, the debate Agora did with the paper, which was good, but it was the only time that everybody was together on a stage. Otherwise, people didn't seem to want to be in the same room as each other. Further, that social media somehow got so vicious and strange, where people were being untruthful, or they would take these little half-truths and turn them into an accusation about somebody not being environmentally interested or in bed with developers, and without bothering in any way to substantiate it with any facts. So that's what's happening in our national culture, it seems to me, with the presidencies, that it's terrible, and that the other side, not only do they have differing opinions, but they're traitors. So what I was hoping to do, and I've been accused of being naive before, is set a stage for something completely different, which is being as transparent as I can be and as clear on my public communications on the website to say, here's exactly what I think. If I don't know something about something, I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm going to say, I don't know. I'm going to research more and get back to you, or what are your ideas? And then to not attack any other candidates on irrelevant personality points or irrelevant historical facts, but to say, what do you think about the issue? Here's what I think. Our ends are probably close to the same. Our means are what's different. Let's talk about it. And so when I say a political reset, I think that Ojai is small and mighty enough to set its own tenor, in some ways. And so it doesn't take that much. And what I'd like to do, and hope it continues, is tweak it so that we're just having a regular open forum for the mayor. We have 2 candidates, and we're just going to hear the issues out. And mostly it's been there, not 100%. So on social media, there's still people that would not like it to be that way. But It's okay. I wasn't expecting 100%, but so far pretty good. We'll see if that holds. That's what I meant by political reset, is we're all kind of in this together. So let's act as if that's the case, you know? And then this image occurred to me the other day, which is on the way for our current council, but as you're deciding things, or for, you know, as this election goes on, instead of leaving these gigantic, you know, potholes of destruction in the wake of getting to our end, let's not do that, right? Let's just say, yes, we differ about some things. Let's talk it through. We're going to go for a vote, and we live in this wonderful majority system, and then we'll proceed and go forward and work together for the common benefit, you know? So that's the hope. Now, the second part of your question, though, was how do we know if it's working? Something that I want to add and have it be on every council agenda, of which there's many things on the website that I'm suggesting, but here's one, that we have a rolling cycle where every 6 months from an ordinance adoption, and then 12 months, that they're always listed on the agenda somewhere. And that I'm just going to call it like a check-in and say, we passed this 6 months ago, how's it going? You know, going to the staff, is it working the way we intended? Did we forget something? Whatever. That I'd like to see at 6 months and 12 months. There should be something on the agenda every single time where we just revisit that. So from a practical perspective, I hope that's happening. From a, I'd call it a cultural or organizational cultural perspective, what I hope happens is you actually see some lively and respectful conversations in council. And so I've tried to say before that we often go to a council meeting and you hear the staff report and you hear the public comments, and then you hear serial monologues, essentially. There might be a few questions, but you'll even see candidates pull something out of their back pocket, a pre-written statement, and then they'll read it and then they vote. And mostly, not 100%, you're not surprised by the vote. They vote mostly what you thought. And my thinking is, why did we waste an hour talking? Let's just do the vote if that's all it's going to be. Instead, what I'd love to do is say, we're literally, truly coming here to deliberate. And I'm going to do that, and I'm going to try to set the stage that others do that there as well, I hope. And so one area of success, I would say, is there is an ethics code that we've all agreed to. There is a priorities workshop, and that, you know, 5 or 6 big priorities are on every agenda. And we're literally talking, not agreeing. Like I've said this before too, but 5-0 votes every vote is not health, not at all. It's that, but you see the process, the way the communication goes, and that if I bring something up and you're in the council and you say, oh, Andy, help me understand where you're coming from. I'm not getting it. And then I explain myself to you, and then you say, oh, okay, but what about this? This is what we said 2 weeks ago. That's the kind of back and forth that I hope gets to a bigger truth.
Yeah. Well, and you're kind of segueing into my next question, was be like, so if elected as mayor, as the mayor who holds the gavel at those meetings, how would you manage disagreements both among council members, and then sometimes there's this tension, or I don't know if it's necessarily disagreement, but between council members and the public, and just particularly at the public meetings. How would you would you approach that? When you just to clarify, so the disagreement between the public and the council members, do you mean what the public says at the comment period, or what are you thinking? Yeah, so yes, during public comment, and then sometimes just throughout the meeting, there can be behavior. Things.
Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
Right? So the role of mayor at a meeting is you're the chair of the meeting. And so we're trying to get at how you approach tension or that back and forth, or, you know.
No, I'm not pretending that's going to be easy. In the meeting, you know, you might say I'm going to be going the opposite direction potentially, but what I would love to do is to say, if there is an issue that we just know it's going to be contentious and a lot of people are going to want to speak, I'm proposing that we have a separate workshop there, let's say on a Saturday afternoon or something, and it's only on that issue. I'd like to give everybody more time to talk. Now you might think, am I crazy? But, you know, give them 5 or 6 minutes, you know, everybody the same, of course. But then at that meeting, you would hear a staff report, hear as much public comment, and then maybe there's some, you know, expert people, for example, everything about, let's say climate or the unhoused. There's people that know way more than me. I would love to hear some expert testimony or whatever you want to say. But I love those weekend workshops to have no action taken. In other words, all we're doing is getting feedback, and then at the following Tuesday's council meeting, we don't do that all again. We did it, but then we deliberate, so we've got a couple days to digest this. What I hope is, now disagreement is completely fine, and I would argue even healthy. So disagreement's totally okay. It's when it's tense or
and respectful disagreement.
Respectful.
Probably. So, yeah.
That's what I was.
So how do you handle the belligerent disagreement? Because there's been
of course, yeah,
some of that. So.
Well, modeling it would be one. So the first thing would be is I will strive to be as respectful as I can be by asking polite questions, like the way I posed some to you just now. But then, but if somebody does speak and I just want to be plain, if I feel like they're saying something much differently than they said earlier in the meeting or 2 weeks ago at the prior meeting, I don't want to be shy about saying, Kim, help me understand, like, last time you talked about process being the most important, not the product, but now you're saying this product's so important that the process could be circumvented. Help, what's going on here? I do want to have that, and I hope that by modeling that, even with council people that they already know I disagree with them about some things, I hope that they would see I'm going to be a completely just person there in that room. I mean, the way I would want to be all the time, but that I'm going to be there. But I agree, though, sometimes that whoever, even if we go to the at-large voting and we just have a rotating mayor, that person is going to have to keep order. That's part of what that job is, and that means keeping the order. So consistency is the key. And I'm sure that Betsy regretted giving, for example, the one public person more time when she was so passionate, and obviously the thing blew up. But I'm sure she regrets doing that. But we have to be procedurally just 100% of the time. So I also propose 20-minute monologues aren't acceptable for a council person, in my opinion. And so I would offer, let's have a timer, and 8 minutes. Does that seem generous? Like, to make your point in 8 minutes? So people dominating, I don't want to have happen. But even if people repeat themselves a lot, I'd like to, it's sort of like, if you believe somebody has your best interest in mind, you give them the benefit of the doubt, it seems to me. And so if everybody knows who's in there that I am caring about their best interest, then if I suggest, you don't have to keep repeating yourself. You said it once and you said it very well, and I've got it. That just to keep the meeting sort of more efficient. And I guess the other thing I would hope for too is when we see that we are working on issues that have a lot of local applicability and efficacy, I hope that we feel like, wow, we're really doing something that's positive, not doing things that tear the community apart, that in my opinion have nothing to do with us. I don't want to be doing that. And so I did say this last night. I did have a vision that people someday, they quit watching the council meetings because they're so boring. And they're so boring because they spent 45 minutes making sure that the road paving project is on track. And they think, I don't have to do it. They've got it. I'm going to watch my show. That would be a dream come true. Now, I'm not saying don't watch the council meetings. I'm saying we watch the council meetings right now wondering, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Like, anything can happen. And we feel like we have to watch it or be there because we want to make sure nothing happens that's too terrible. What can we influence? So I hope they become the boringest meetings in the county. So that's a goal.
All right, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Let me see. I'm checking in on my questions because you've covered some things. You talked about the traffic a bit in relation. Maybe checking in. So, you kind of talked about traffic in the context of working to reduce folks needing to drive in and out for work and housing.
Yeah.
But are there other kind of issues around traffic that you see that are important for the council to dig into? And I'm thinking about, the stuff that might be more kind of day-to-day pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, things like that.
I know that it's good because it's a many layered topic, but there's a few things right away. Sousa said this actually. So Caltrans obviously takes care of Ojai Avenue, but there's a few very specific things that need to be done right away, and they really should be done immediately. One would be the flashing lights across, the park to the arcade. That should just be the number one Caltrans project. Similarly with, going from across to Montgomery, like where OUSD is. It's just terrible that those aren't there. So there's a few things like that. There are other things related to Caltrans though that I have wondered about. I'm going to be at OUSD's board meeting tomorrow for a little bit I know them, but I just say, hey, I want to say to you publicly, if I'm elected, I want our relationship to be so solid that we meet each other regularly. You understand where we're coming from. I want to know where you're coming from. That should be this way with Caltrans too. So when Caltrans was working on Ojai Avenue the day before Ojai Day, and all of us were saying, how did this happen? Now, it's one thing to say, it's not the city, it's Caltrans. Technically, that's true. But I believe that in councils past, where there was more of a relationship, you could say, I get that you have to do this thing. Can you do it the day after or the weekend after Ojai Day? That's the kind of relationship I would hope to bring on that side with that agency. So that's one little thing. I'm all for the traffic officer that if you've been downtown on the weekend, you saw the motorcycle officer. I'm all for it. I know it was by design. We laid off the traffic enforcement. And when I was a kid, you never sped going into town because you knew there was going to be a cop that was going to give you a ticket. You just knew it. So you'd be a teenager, you just got your license, and you're like scared to death because you're scared of getting pulled over. Going down, like right by Ojai Liquor, making that turn, going into town. Anyway, I'm glad that the officer is there. I fully support that expense. And so more enforcement in general, I think, needs to happen. There needs to be this comes up literally almost every day. We are behind the legislative curve on the e-bikes. Everybody gets that. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see more come from Sacramento, but counties can do more. Of course, we know that. So we know, I believe Moore Park has some initiatives going, but everybody agrees it's a real threat at the way it is right now, that kids are threatened being hit by a car. You literally could see kids doing wheelies in the middle of the arcade. I mean, we've all seen that. So that's something that we do need to address right away. There are some things out there like increased regulation, like the class 3 e-bike having a motorcycle license. I'm not saying I'm for that. I'm saying that's out there proposed. Mm-hmm. But this is one thing that there's two last parts to answer your question. One is I think we should have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit citywide immediately, and that we could look at individual streets such as Drown, that I know people from Drown have approached me about putting speed humps there. I think we should definitely try it. I'm all for that. It's a narrow street. Let's give that a try. Here's an idea about the paving. If you look at the paving project in detail that, they just re-upped, and we saw that. Mm. My aunt lived on Sunset, now she's at the Gables. So Sunset kind of by Grandview, the street is in terrible, terrible shape. Riding my bike on it, I've got a flat tire. So it's really bad. It's not slated to be redone until 2026. And then many people's streets are in that boat. And I know what Lindy said is absolutely correct. We have a very ambitious plan going. COVID got in the way of the plan. 100% on board. What I would like to do in two things on the paving project. One is I would love to pause just a slight bit, not pause on the project, but just say, could we have a demonstration area to look at alternative materials that have less carbon emission? Just to try it. Now, I know other cities, Montebello's one, I've been looking at their work, what they're doing, but they're using recycled materials. In some sense, that it's lighter. The streets aren't just the dark black. They're trying to reduce neighborhood temperatures. And again, I'm not saying here's what to do. I'm saying here's where to start researching. What are the materials? What's the cost? What's the longevity of the project? What maintenance is needed? And then have a demonstration in a neighborhood or whatever and say, here's your street using recycled. What is it like? Because that's the kind of climate response I've tried to propose is we should be thinking really broadly with every project and say, as you were there, somebody pointed out the concrete building the pickleball courts at Soul Park emits so much carbon, and it's okay. It is what it is. But why are we focused on these little tiny projects and we get really upset and fight about it and we're not paying attention to some really big projects? That's what I'd like to do. But here's an idea. First time, haven't said it anywhere else. Okay. We have this surplus and we know what the budget is on the paving project, and we know it, and Lindy's done a good job of spreading it out over years. Just an idea. We know that every year that a project goes on, the more it costs year on year. That's just economics 101 practically, right? What if we took some of that 50% in addition to the designated 50% reserve, and we said, can we accelerate the paving project and do it now? maybe we have
do those really bad streets now that she's saying.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you have your plan for 24, 25.
Okay.
And then you've got a 25, 26 and going down. And we have the money year on year. I'm saying this money is budgeted. There aren't contracts for those other years, and the price, I think, likely will go up. Why not take some of 25, 26, move it into 24, 25? Maybe it's another contractor, maybe it's this contractor if they can manage it, and pay for it now and do it now. Take some of the surplus because it's just going to cost more.
Fund it from the surplus.
Yeah.
And then it's today's prices.
Yeah.
So prices don't go up.
But accelerate the timeline.
Yeah.
So that's just an idea. But it seems to me, again, with the surplus, we might serve ourselves well and save money in that next budget cycle to do it now. But I'd like to just, the paving did delay a year, not only the city's fault, but part of it was just managing out of COVID and all that, of course. But I see safety and infrastructure as the two number one things the city should be working on. So if that's true, then let's accelerate that timeline and get us where we're all driving on streets. We had to change the shocks in 2 of our cars. I know people have gotten flat tires on Ojai Avenue. Okay, we get it. We're working on it, and it isn't I don't think it's because of negligence or anything, but it's been a lot of competing priorities. So I'd love to accelerate that. So yeah, I would love traffic to be the least of our problems, I guess.
Okay. Folks are talking about increasing the city's sales tax, the hotel tax. Where do you stand on those?
Well, on the website, you'll probably see I did say, here are ideas to look at for revenue generation, and I'm not saying let's do it, I'm saying let's look into it. The sales tax has, as we know, only a portion of the sales tax goes to us, but the city manager seems confident in saying you can know, and it kind of makes sense. You would be able to know what tourists are generating sales tax versus residents, like Ace Hardware is generating resident sales tax, obviously that's kind of stuff. But I'm not categorically opposed to any of those things, but what I would do is I would want to ask the pretty serious question, well, what is it tied to? I especially in our current environment where we have this, not only the surplus, but 100% reserve, it doesn't seem like it's exactly the right environment to say, let's increase the revenue without a very pointed cause. So if the pointed cause were because of a project, then I'd really want to tie it to the project, for example. So I would want to reserve the funds that way. But looking at the TOT is a good example. So what the hotels would say, I mean, as a resident here who also brings people here to stay in hotels sometimes, like for my work, I don't pay attention to the TOT and neither do they. I mean, it's just like a tax and you don't pay much attention to it. So adding 8% or 2 seems like that's not going to be negligible. I mean, it's going to be negligible and not be much of an impact, especially when their occupancy rate seems to be 100% on the weekends in perpetuity, how it appears.
It doesn't seem like we're going to start seeing empty hotels if we raise it. Yeah.
That's how it appears. Yeah. But what I do hear upon research is there's a lot of competition for conferences that are brought to our hotels here. And those are competitive, and an increase in the tax would jeopardize their competitiveness. So that's just, again, everything we talk about has these aspects, or you go, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or that's interesting. So I think whatever sort of revenue generation we would come to, I would like to work with the people who they would impact the most and say, you tell us where you're coming from. What would be the least detrimental for you or difficult to implement, and so you can understand where we're coming from. Now, is there a way that they could help us with our expenses? I would love to have that conversation. Maybe that's part of the conversation. What has got brought up before is what's sometimes called a mansion tax. That's the shorthand. Right. So when people talk about, I have somebody, the person who lives right behind me, for example, they're there one weekend a month, and the house is unoccupied the whole rest of the time. And as people tell me, there are many of those in town. It's someone's second home or third. So I sometimes get asked, could we tax the second or third home? That seems very difficult to objectively try to tally. That seems harder, but a mansion tax is easier. So we'd have to figure out what that number would be, but it would be hypothetically if you were selling a property that's over 5 million, let's say, hypothetically, there'd be an extra tax. That's an objective criteria that we can
But
determine.
the seller, who pays that tax?
So the way that the industry has gone, would go towards I know the buyer would have to pay the tax.
Okay.
But because the way that also the agents would then go towards that. But if I'm understanding that correctly, maybe I'm not. But in either case, that's something that we could do if we needed revenue generation. But there's a dozen revenue generation ideas out there. Those are just a couple. But again, I would do that when a need presented itself, and I would work with who it's going to impact the most. So the way that I was trying to say this with the cultural contribution is, I see tourism does something really wonderful for our town, which is it generates a lot of revenue for doing things we want to do. And I also think that it increases the caliber of our culture in some important ways, like the quality of the arts or the quality of restaurants and all that kind of stuff. I totally agree with all that. And there's a really significant cost. It's in traffic and it's in our housing prices. Those are costs that we pay to have tourists here. So I would like to find as many ways as possible for the tourists to pay for the quality of our residents' lives. The more ways we could do that.
So how do we do that?
Well, one is this cultural contribution, right? So that would go directly towards nonprofits servicing Ojai. But then the other would be, again, very directly saying, can we increase all the work that's being done on our infrastructure to try to improve it? So I would like to move that into, but I haven't asked this specifically, but I would love to work with some of the restaurateurs here and specifically the inns and say, can we make a deal with you that you pave our whole bike path for us? Like those kinds of arrangements. Now, again, I haven't asked that.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing I would like to ask. And if it ever came up that somebody said, like the Ojai Valley Inn, we're interested in some workforce housing here. We know we've surveyed our staff. We know some would like to be here. And I say, let's talk. And if it's, you buy some land and donate it to the Land Conservancy and it's part of now a park that we all have in perpetuity, I'm willing to hear you, That's the kind of give and take I'd like to do with those organizations. So.
Okay. Let's see. You talked about this right at the start about the importance of kind of the ethics guidelines. Other things that you referenced last week was things like governance training and bringing back oversight committees as a part of revising council procedures. And that those things are a top priority.
They're top in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so why is that important for those things to be top in time?
And what I mean by top in time is I just mean done first. It's done first so that the rest of the term that we have together could be effective, right? So if we could set the stage for those things, and then for those that have worked in organizations that have been effective, a really common model, it seems to me, is you have your strategic priorities and then you have all of your activities that point to the strategic priorities, and they can't be too many. You make it be reasonable, and then you say, what am I doing in my daily activity that's pointing to one of these strategies? And you think, well, if it's not, either you're doing something that should be there or you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. In other words, you figure out how is this pointing to the grander vision. So if we could do that right away early on and say, obviously it's going to be managing the encampments. It clearly has to be one, right? They're obvious things, right? So you pick those things and you say, if something else comes up, we ask ourselves, is this something that is worthy of moving one of these things? We don't just get to add to the list. You say, is it worth moving one of those or not? And if it's not, then you park it in the right place. So this is related to the council tranquility or effectiveness, but in general, if we could do some of those things right away and that we agree, hey, we're not going to do these things on social media, or we're not going to say these things outside of the council, and again, I'd like to be going for goodwill and transparency, of which, my criticism is not only has there been infighting, but there's been a lot of just mean-spirited talk that just creates all this division, I think, in the council, and it gets them not wanting to be in the same room together. We've heard them say that. That is just not a functioning organization that I think we need. So having that whole beginning part set the stage, I think, would be wonderful for the rest. But and also, those are completely in our control. So if you say, oh, affordable housing is number one and we got to do it, that's 2 years out if you did it really well now. You know, I mean, before you have a house to move into maybe. Yeah. But these procedures could be done in 2 months, you know. Yeah. And again, I proposed a couple of things. I don't know if they will work, but I'd like to meet more frequently and less long. That's something I personally prefer. And I like the agendas out sooner so that you guys had them published in the paper prior to the meeting. I would really like that too. Again, just more transparency, even if it requires more meetings or things take a little bit longer. I feel like we're really in the stage that we need to build community trust. And that means more FaceTime, you know, more being in front of people. Mm-hmm. And again, like the oversight committees that you went over, there should be a budget committee, in my opinion. And one thing that I think is going to come up tonight is Ben, the city manager, said, well, you know, I'm going to present you a budget that doesn't just have the 50% reserve as designated in 2001, but 100% reserve. And not only that, by the way, that 50% extra, that's $8 million. Not only that, 3.4 million on top of that. That's what he's calling the delta. Nobody in the council said where this money come from. Like, you know, stop the press. Yeah. Now, I don't think there was anything wrongly done. I think that there was money set aside that was not reserved for anything. That was, as I've come to learn, it was set aside for terrible things like a disaster, mm-hmm. but now are available. Why didn't we know about that?
Yeah. And some contingencies, I had asked mm-hmm. about that.
Good.
And particularly in Public Works. Yeah. Lindy Palmer, the director of Public Works, yeah. or she's an interim, I think, right now. Mm-hmm. She said, you know, we put like a 10% contingency on kind of all the Public Works projects. Good. Maybe that's a different amount. And mm-hmm. so sometimes you don't hit that. So then mm-hmm. you've got this little chunk of money, yeah. and that adds up. And so some of that, not all of it.
Explaining
that, yeah.
Even the pickleball court that came out of the paving fund, that was part of that explanation, right? Which is, this was a surplus and not part of the budget. And yeah. you're sitting in the room going, but there was a delay in the paving project, so can we take that
yeah.
percent? But anyway, that's where I thought a budget oversight committee made up the right way, you know, with the right people, with the right interests and the right expertise, could at least point us and say, there's some inconsistencies here, or, you know, here's this money that's sitting here. This is money that, you know, could be used for something. Just having that very public conversation that is upfront, just right from the very beginning. Here's our situation. What do we think? And so even today, like in the council today, there's going to be a proposal of how to spend this surplus. And I'm going to say tonight, it seems to me we're missing an opportunity for community involvement here. Especially, some of those do seem obvious and will probably come to pass, but some are, let's give this to this nonprofit, or let's do this. And you're like, this is out of the blue. Like we haven't seen this before or seen it in this way. This seems like a great opportunity to request some proposals or have some other kind of meeting, and there's no urgency on it. So why does it have to be tonight? That'd be the kind of thing that I'd like to see as a more standard course.
Okay. And that is another great unplanned segue. Mm-hmm. So City Council just has to work with and rely on different staff mm-hmm. in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. You know, and there can be great dynamic, there can be tension sometimes. Mm-hmm. In thinking about, you know, if elected, mm-hmm. how do you view that relationship and that, you know, working relationship when with some staff members, like, you know, the City Council hires the city manager mm-hmm. and is essentially the boss as a body of that.
Right.
But then when there's something that maybe you don't agree with, that mm-hmm. the city manager is saying, how do you approach that relationship or think about it, and how would you mm-hmm. bring issues forward?
Thank you. No, that's good.
10 minutes.
Okay. Thanks. So with boards and then the superintendent or the manager, you know, the CEO essentially. I've been on boards that did it. I see two extremes. On the one extreme, the board rubber stamps everything the superintendent or the CEO wants. And so they bring something forward. They almost always say yes. They ask kind of the polite questions, but they're softballs. On the other hand, I've been on school boards where the board members wanted to go into individual classrooms and tell teachers what they could and couldn't do. That's micromanaging, and that's going way too far. They have no power outside of that public meeting. That's it. That's the power they have. So I've seen both of those extremes. I do think that not knowing, I mean, I'm not in the closed doors, you know, so we don't know what's happening back there, but I have had the impression that there are conversations that seem to translate into policy decisions or how they come out in the meeting that I'm questioning, I'm concerned about. And so those would be the kind of things that I would press back on if I thought that was happening. If there were individual council members going to the city manager that then determine what he is doing in the meeting, that seems like that's problematic. And we have some recent examples of that. I hope the relationship could be really solid. When we interviewed Ben, I felt really confident in him, and I still do feel that.
And I just want to say, so
Agora.
in your role as, in your employment with the
That's
Agora Foundation, you interviewed the city manager.
Good qualification, thank you. It was that I thought that he had some really good experience, and I thought, and if you were in the room, I would say it this way. Ojai is pretty insistent on having their voices heard. And we've had some recent examples that he had to backtrack and say, oh, I pushed this forward and we need to pull back now. The unhoused encampment would be one of those examples. So that could be learned. And that's what I would try to help him learn, is that actually going slower and steadier is the way to go, in my opinion. Even the way that the commissioners are appointed, he suggested from his prior experience, you know, in the places I've worked, if I remember what he said correctly, the council people appoint a commissioner directly with the council approval, of course, but they do that for their term. And I came to say, I think it should be the chair, the council liaison, and the mayor unanimously agree on who they're going to forward, and it forces that conversation at that level. And I think that needed compromise. So I get it. Maybe from Ben's perspective, this is an assumption. He thinks, why make it be so clunky? And I'm saying, this is where we're at. We're in the trust building phase, and this is where a lot of talking is going to have to come up. I do think that councils should press back on city managers when needed, and they should do that, you know, obviously privately when it makes sense, but publicly, very importantly. So, for example, I said this in my editorial to the paper too. I said, when we had this situation on Bald Street with that property and how it had to be so fast, and then you had the owner retract
the cabin village,
for the cabin village, and then we learn at the next meeting, oh, there wasn't the deadline the way we thought. It was a miscommunication from the granting agency. All of us are in the room. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I'm saying, what happened? How did the communication go so awry that we were going? We have citywide workshops on things that are minuscule, in my opinion, compared to that. So we're going to bypass all of this stuff. And so that would be the thing that I would, as a council person, say, how did this happen and how can we avoid this happening again? I'm not that interested in blaming. I'm interested in figuring out what in the process got us to that place. What we did get was none of that, right? It was more like, well, this is what we're going to do going forward. Or we don't want to, you know, stick too much in the past and that kind of stuff. And I'm saying, we're all having some worried confidence in this project because there's been several key missteps. So I do think it's a council's job as the hiring agency for the manager to press the manager when needed, but then to have a very collaborative relationship. You know, so the answer always is both, but not doing anything is not in the city, or not pressing is not in the city's service, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. And so we're basically pretty close to an hour. Is there anything you thought I was going to ask about that you haven't?
No, everything I just said to you is pretty much what I've been trying to say. And I do think that the approach that I've been thinking about a lot more is that you can have a solution that works on many problems at once with the right people in the room and the right, you know, organizations there. And So again, you could be working on climate and traffic and the difficulties in our housing at the same time, you know, if it's worked out correctly. But I just haven't seen that approach articulated quite that way, at least in a way that caught a lot of momentum. I hope it's catching it now.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And you can get more information about Andy Gilman's campaign at your website, which is?
AndyGilmanforOhai.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.